I said I was going to top with Dark Magician in 2024. With so many events planned and being planned over the course of the year, we need to make sure our lists and theories are up to par with the current format and make sure we adapt. In my last video, I went over a Dark Magician Runic variant that has since seen some revisions. I'm here to quickly discuss the problems that I came across with the original list along with the changes that followed. Before going into this particular deck profile, I do want to emphasize that my previous list wasn't a bad list. The difference between this list and that one is that essentially this is a kind of a solution to a lot of problems I ran into within my previous deck profile. I felt that in hindsight, the theory was there and everything does function the way it's supposed to. However, when put into practice and put into hours and hours and hours of application, there are some niche situations that came up and do cause problems which hinder the ceiling of this of this deck, which is Runic Dark Magician. The issues I have and had have been kind of solved throughout hours and hours of testing, and I just want to share those solutions with you, along with even more problems that I came about when theorizing this new list. A lot of it's the same, and a lot of it has changed. But without further ado, let's just get into the deck profile. I do right away want to start off by talking about the Dark Magician ratios and the Dark Magician cards. We immediately start the deck profile by cutting one Dark Magician, and we're now playing the one Dark Magician, the one Dark Magician girl. The idea is that two Dark Magician was just so bricky, it was so excessive, you just don't need it. Even in a list where you don't really have ways to recycle it, I don't really think that you need two of this card. Once you resolve that one Dragoon, and the game's so fast that once you utilize the one to make your Dragoon or the Dark Magicians, the deck and the Runic engines should facilitate the rest of the plays and allow the deck to function just as strong. We do follow up the list with 3 copies of Magician Souls. This remains unchanged. The Magician Souls is just so crazy, just allowing you to pitch your Runic cards to draw them after and recycle them if you needed. Magician Souls just being able to generate fodder along with getting Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl into the graveyard to facilitate your plays is just so unbelievably strong. We continue the list by cutting Magician's Rod from 3 to 2. Now, the issue I came across was the same issue I've been having with Rod for as long as I can remember, and that issue is simply you hate opening more than one in your hand. You see this card have more than one in your hand, you are in such a terrible spot. The card is incredibly easy to access with cards like Illusion of Chaos, with cards like even Soul Servant sometimes. It's not needed at more than 2. In addition, the one thing we need to keep in mind is that Magician's Rod is ridiculously easy to constantly recur with this list. Remember, every runic spell outside the field spell is a quick play spell, which does end up triggering Rod, which allows you to tribute a spellcaster monster, whether it's Souls, whether it's DMG, DM, even the Dark Magician. Once Dark Magician resolves, you can tribute Dark Magicians to resolve Rod and then recycle it back into your hand. So you don't really need more than 2. That was a mistake on my part in my last profile. And we carry on with 1 copy of Timaeus the United Dragon. Timaeus the United Dragon, as much as I don't really like this card, it is still relatively mandatory because it's the only in-archetype way to summon out Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Red Eyes Dark Dragoon is your best card, is your best monster. This is the card you want to see on the field at all times, pairing it with your Runic cards to kind of control the game and control the game state, which is why, Timaeus is unfortunately needed, even though it is an awful card in hindsight. Following up the list, this is a cut I absolutely despise, but it needed to be made. We cut Illusion of Chaos from 3 to 2. Reason being is essentially Illusion of Chaos as a card. For one reason, we never summon it, but the biggest issue with Illusion of Chaos was, 1, you see more than 2 in your hand, it does get a little cloggy, and this is the argument I hear all the time for Preparation of Rites. Oh, Matchy, if you open a Preparation of Rites with the Illusion of Chaos, you could pitch it off, you could pitch the prep off Souls to get draws. The biggest issue I had with prep was Droll and Lockbird. I feel like getting drolled on the Illusion of Chaos is so much better than getting drolled on the Preparation of Rites, which is why I always opted to play 3. However, The point of Illusion of Chaos is to essentially maximize how much we see Magician's Souls, Magician's Rod, Timaeus at times, and even DMG DM. It does come up where Illusion of Chaos is searching these two. Now, the issue I had with 3 is that 3 was a little excessive, right? We are, cutting the Magician's Rod count, the Timaeus counts, the Souls. Essentially, Illusion of Chaos just adds us 2 extra copies of every single monster here, which is, in hindsight, more than enough to see an engine that isn't particularly great. We then also cut Soul Servant from 3 to 2. Now, Soul Servant, as amazing as this card was, and the synergy it has with the Runic cards, simply allowing you to stack your deck with any one of these cards here, it was just incredible. So you really wanted to see this card. The issue, again, was you see more than one in your hand, or in the grind game, if you top deck the Soul Servant, it just felt so bad. In addition, the Soul Servant's strength comes from its graveyard effect, allowing you to banish it to draw 2 cards. The issue I had with 3 Soul Servants is that 3 never came up in a game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so fast that resolving 3 Soul Servants in a game, you're either winning already and you're just stalling out your opponent, or for whatever reason you're just toying with them or something like that. In a actual game where you're trying to close out the match, you are never ever resolving 3 Soul Servants. Another card I cut was the 1 Dark Magical Circle and 1 Secrets of Dark Magic, to only play the last copy of Secrets of Dark Magic. In my previous profile, I did play 2 Secrets. Here we are only playing 1. Reason being is, once again, Soul Servant just being able to recur it every time you do need it. I never found myself resolving this card more than once in a game anyways. Essentially minimizing the bad cards we're playing in the list, right? And that's essentially what we're doing here to allow us to play better engines and cards that can actually help us progress our game state, along with fixing a lot of problems the deck had in my previous profile. The Runic cards performed exceptionally throughout testing. It got to a point where I even wanted to bump up the Runic count to even more quick play spells. However, I didn't do it, but it got to a point where these cards just dominated so many matchups for me that I was so adamant on adding more of the quick play spells. The issue with adding more is that you're starting to add cards that aren't very good and don't really help DM in the slightest. We remain playing the 15 quick plays along with the two fountains, which I think is more than enough to control games. In addition, I just felt like these Runic cards, they cover so much of the format right now, with the exception of Fire Kings. The only reason I'd consider cutting the Runic engine at all would be because of the kind of format we're in. Although the Runic cards have tremendous applications across the entire format currently, with exception of Fire Kings. I think Fire Kings, the deck, specifically Snake Eyes Fire Kings, the Runic cards trade terribly into that deck, only because all of these cards like Flashing Fire or Runic Destruction, they pop monsters which generate that deck advantage, which puts you so far behind. Although, the deck, it's a bittersweet because you can Freezing Curses them at the correct time, or Slumber to essentially protect the card from being popped, which is really strong. And in addition, you can you banish their Populace and things like that to essentially limit the lines of plays they are allowed to make and kind of handicap their deck. With the exception of that, I think the Runic cards trade terribly into that matchup. However, I think they're just too good into the rest of the format. They're too good into Lab, they're too good into Dragon Link, and all those kind of decks. Those tier 1.5 decks per se, they just trade very well into those kind of matchups, which help push Dark Magician in a direction further. My biggest gripe with the deck wasn't necessarily the Runic cards themselves or what they generated. It was the fact that once you summoned Hugin and Gary, for mostly Hugin in this situation, it was so unbelievably difficult to get Hugin off the board, right? And the way we would supplement that issue in our previous list was with Visa Starfrost. Visa Starfrost would essentially act as our access to a synchro toolbox, which allowed us to extend past the Hugin and Gary plays to continue activating our Runic spells. However, the issue with Visa Starfrost, one, it's not searchable in this particular list, and getting cards to search this card just felt so terrible in the list. It does go without saying that I haven't stopped the idea of Visa Starfrost, or haven't stopped thinking about the idea of Visa Starfrost, and I haven't stopped testing it. My only concern was in practice, it just didn't do enough on its own. I think that its ceiling is ridiculously high, but its floor is unbelievably low. Now, the idea of Visa Starfrost was essentially to get rid of these two cards, specifically Gary sometimes, along with Hugin at times, to essentially continue activating your Runic spells, right? The idea was once you have resolved your Hugin or your Gary, and you want to get them off the board to use your Runic spells to summon the other one. So if you started with Hugin, you'd then try to get rid of Hugin to summon Gary, and vice versa, right? And the idea of this was to constantly activate Runic spells to get draws and advance your game state off Fountain. Visa Starfrost did that, however, on such a minimal level, and I needed more of that. And the way we fixed that problem was by playing Branded. We play the 2 Fallen of Albaz, the 2 Blazing Cartesias, 3 copies of Branded Fusion, and 3 copies of Fusion Deployment. The primary reason for these cards is their synergy with Hugin and Gary, along with the Runic cards. I don't need to take this video to explain the synergy Branded Fusion has with Dark Magician. If you watched me over the last few months, you know how much this engine just is so incredible with Dark Magician, and how much advantage it generates on its own in Dark Magician in combination with Dark Magician. However, what this engine allows us to do is essentially do what Visa Starfrost did, but even better on a better scale, especially with Hugin and Gary, to not only remove them from the field once they have resolved their effects, to continue to play the game and continue to build your board and advance your game state. In addition, what these cards allow you to do, especially Cartesia for that matter, is essentially dodge the interruptions on your most important searches. Cartesia allows you to dodge interruptions on Hugin to get your Fountain, and to make sure you play around any imperms or drolls, play around any imperms and effect veilers. Same thing with Gary. And the idea of this was to not only be more protective of your cards resolving, in addition, it was to generate advantage. Now, the addition of Branded Fusion and the Branded Fusion package doesn't go without its warts. My biggest concern with the Branded package is that it's so large, and although I want to cut it, I feel like that engine is as small and as tight as it could possibly be for the deck to function optimally. My biggest issue with this list right now is that it's a solid 40 as it is, which means we have no space to play hand traps. We have no space to play the best hand trap in the game right now, which is Droll and Lockbird. In addition, Ghost Spell I think is unbelievable right now, or the 3 Ash Blossoms. The deck is so tight that there is just no room for non-engine, and I think that is my biggest challenge going forward, and it's to how to optimize the list so that it still does what I need it to do to be able to play at least six non-engine slots, if not 3, because then the 3 could be like Super Poly, which I think is a good enough non-engine slot that will help me break boards, even though I don't have the hand traps to stop it. Essentially, the idea is that I want to play either 6 hand traps, or I want to play 3 Super Polys or 3 board breakers like a Super Poly, Forbidden Droplet, Dark Ruler No More, or evenly matched in the main. That's the idea, right? The biggest issue with this list is that just there's so many things going on, so many cards that are needed to essentially make Dark Magician reach its ceiling, that limits the amount of non-engine we can play. My biggest strength in my branded profiles and my branded Dark Magician profiles was that I had access to non-engine, which is not a luxury that we have here, and that is the next step on optimizing this list to get it ready for competitive play. However, I won't get into that now. I just want to quickly go into the extra deck. The extra deck did change a lot with the cutting of Visa Starfrost. Essentially, we cut our entire Synchro package. However, we are still playing the 2 Red Eyes Dark Dragoons. Red Eyes Dark Dragoon plus Fountain and Runic spells in hand is so crazy. That's what wins you games. That's essentially the board you want. If you get Enon Dragoon and a Fountain, that is enough to win you most games in some situations. The Dark Magicians is a fantastic card to advance your game state. A lot of people don't like it because they don't like the single draw. However, sometimes having a Dark Magician on your turn, getting the free draw, in addition, having Dark Magician with Fountain and a Runic card in name allows you to have access to potentially draw into another Runic name, which is something that, is very, very good. In addition, remember, if your opponent does have a way to out the Runic Fountain, with a spell card or trap card, it doesn't really matter. You will get the draw off the Dark Magicians, and if you draw into a Runic card, you're able to set that Runic card to essentially have further disruption on your opponent's turn, which is something very, very, very strong. So although Dark Magicians isn't a fantastic card, especially with the cutting of Visa Starfrost, I do think it's relatively necessary. For the Runic names, we are just playing the one Gary, the one Hugin, and the one Sleipnir. Now, this is an issue I also have with the extra deck. With the addition of Branded, this makes the extra deck even tighter, which is why I needed to cut one Hugin. It's not optimal. I'm still testing the hell out of this deck, and the idea is to what can I cut for the extra Hugin. I think Hugin is the most important piece in the extra deck, just allowing you to see Runic Fountain. Most important piece outside of Dragoon. I think Dragoon is far and away the most important piece. However, some people have suggested cutting Sleipnir. Sleipnir is just really, really strong. It's a fantastic interruption on your opponent's turn. And Sleipnir is a perfect card in combination with cards like Despian Luluwilith and Grangin Remember, we're playing the Cartesia package, Blazing Cartesia, which allows you to access Grangin. And the beautiful thing about this particular package is Luluwilith becomes so much more relevant in this list, more than in my branded DM list. The reason being is essentially once Grangin resolves on your opponent's turn summoning Luluwilith, you can then activate a Runic spell to special summon an extra deck monster, an extra deck Runic monster. Most of the time it's Sleipnir. What this allows you to do is it allows you to activate Luluwilith's effect. When an extra deck monster leaves the extra deck, which is Luluwilith's conditions, you can then negate a monster on the board. That's one negate. If you summon Sleipnir as that extra deck monster, Sleipnir is an additional interruption on your opponent's turn, as it allows you to banish both itself and a monster they control in their battle phase. So off like a Runic card and Grangin, you have two interruptions, which is just really, really strong. You pair that with a Dragoon and you're just generating so many interruptions on your opponent's turn as the game progresses. It's just really, really strong. We then go into the branded cards. We play the 2 copies of Albion. I am thinking about cutting one for the extra Hugin. However, Albion is the most important branded card. We are playing the one Lubellion to essentially replenish assets and resources. If your Dark Magician gets banished, this shuffle is it back. If your Hugin or Gary gets banished, it will shuffle itself back, which is really, really strong, right? Hugin can banish itself to protect Runic Fountain, and essentially Lubellion can shuffle back Hugin to make Mirror Jade with Fallen of Albaz to essentially allow you to keep Hugin in the extra deck and allow you to keep protecting your monsters. We then finish the extra deck with our Super Poly targets, one Dracostapelia and one Garura. Garura is very self-explanatory. It just hits so many matchups. Fire King sets up a perfect Super Poly board for Garura. The bigger question is Dracostapelia. Why are we playing Dracostapelia? Well, in the odd chance that we open, for example, Secrets of Dark Magic and Dark Magician, or Secrets and, for example, Dark Magician Girl, Dracostapelia essentially allows us to dodge interruptions with cards like Hugin or Gary. If we activate a Runic spell with Secrets and Dark Magician, and your opponent tries to interact with Hugin or Gary, you can then chain Secrets with Dark Magician, and if you hard open Dark Magician, that is, and Hugin to make a Predaplan Dracostapelia, which is an additional interruption on your opponent's turn if needed, or even with the way these decks now play on both turns, it allows you to just protect your board a little bit more, which I think is really, really strong. The final card in the extra deck is SP Little Knight. For the odd chance that you don't open your branded fusion or your fusion deployment, SP Little Knight is so free in this list because you're always ending on 2-3 monsters on your board. Most of the time, if you don't have a way to get rid of Magician's Rod, it's beautiful SP Little Knight fodder. Rod and a Runic monster. If you end on that, it makes an SP Little Knight, which is just so strong. If with both interacting with your opponent's graveyard, with your own graveyard, and interacting as an interruption on your opponent's turn is just really strong. SP Little Knight is so crazy. Even though we're fusion locked most of the time, there needs to be a slot for SP Little Knight. In addition, in the grind game, SP Little Knight can just win you games outright. So that's it for the extra deck, and that's it for the deck profile. There are several videos I am making on this particular list, on this particular version of the deck, from test hands, from live locals matches, and more things like that. In addition, I am working on a humongous project that hopefully will hit the ground running in the next coming weeks. But for the time being, I want to thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye.